Have you ever watched a member of Congress get taken down on live television by their opponent using their own state's numbers? The House Oversight Committee hearing room is strung tight as a wire. Clay Higgins, former sheriff, infamous for personal broadsides, has just aimed straight at Jasmine Crockett. She doesn't answer with fire. She simply opens a blue folder. Rock-bottom education rankings, lagging reading and math proficiency, alarming child poverty and maternal mortality rates in Louisiana. With each data point laid on the table, the room falls silent. Higgins' smile fades. When he tries to wedge in a point of order, the chair lets Crockett continue, 'cause Higgins started this. Her voice stays even and firm, stitching facts to the core question. If the state receives substantial federal support, why resist baseline standards to ensure taxpayer dollars truly improve life in the classroom? No bluster, no ornament, just data forcing a reckoning with reality. The closing beat of this opening chapter isn't a punchline. It's the sobering hush that spreads across the room. In Congress, when truth is on the table, personal attacks fall out of tune. If you want more stories like this, where knowledge and composure stand up to raw power, hit subscribe and join our community at Jasmine Crockett File. We bring you political moments that not only shock, but inspire. Clay Higgins had built his political brand as Captain America, the tough-talking former sheriff and viral video star who'd risen from law enforcement to Congress. The Louisiana Republicans' campaign ads featured him in tactical gear, promising to hunt down criminals and political opponents alike. His supporters adored his brash, unapologetic style and his frequent Fox News appearances, where he portrayed himself as a defender of traditional values and Louisiana pride. Today's Oversight Committee hearing on federal education funding had begun routinely enough. Members from both parties presented their arguments, with Republicans generally arguing for local control and Democrats advocating for increased federal support. But when Crockett suggested that states with the worst educational outcomes might need more federal oversight, Higgins took personal offense. Across the dais sat Jasmine Crockett, a freshman Democrat from Texas with credentials that made her an unexpected powerhouse. Before entering politics, Crockett had built a reputation as one of Texas's most effective civil rights attorneys. She'd won landmark cases against systemic discrimination and had a prosecutor's gift for dismantling weak arguments with precision. What many in Washington didn't yet realize was that her legal background had trained her to enter every confrontation meticulously prepared, with facts her opponents often overlooked. For Crockett, this hearing wasn't just about policy disagreements. As one of the few black women in Congress, she'd faced a pattern of dismissive treatment from certain colleagues who seemed to believe her Harvard law education and legal career didn't entitle her to the same respect they showed others. Higgins's condescending tone was familiar. She'd faced similar attitudes in courtrooms across Texas, but unlike those courtrooms, congressional hearings played out on a national stage with millions watching. The stakes were enormous. This exchange would either reinforce the notion that newer members, particularly women of color, could be dismissed without consequence, or it would establish that substantive knowledge and preparation still mattered in congressional debate. For the people of Louisiana and Texas, the policy implications were equally significant. Whether federal resources would flow to communities with the greatest needs or be restricted by ideological opposition to federal involvement. Committee Chairman James Comer recognized Crockett for her 5-minute response. "The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized," he stated, his tone neutral, but his expression suggesting he anticipated the standard partisan back and forth. Crockett adjusted her microphone, her expression composed despite Higgins' attack. The gallery braced for what they assumed would be a typical congressional exchange of talking points and rehearsed outrage. What they didn't realize was that Jasmine Crockett had been preparing for this moment since her first day in Congress. She'd quietly compiled detailed statistics on every state represented on the committee, not for a political attack, but because she believed representatives should understand the actual conditions their constituents faced. She knew Louisiana statistics particularly well because they illustrated precisely why federal oversight of education and anti-poverty programs was so crucial. Higgins lounged in his chair, scrolling through his phone as Crockett organized her papers. His dismissive body language suggested he viewed her response as a mere formality unworthy of his full attention. "Thank you. Mr. Chairman," Crockett began. "Before I address the policy questions before us, I feel I must respond to the personal attack from my colleague from Louisiana." Higgins glanced up briefly, a slight smirk still playing across his face. He had no idea what was coming. Act 3. The Escalation. 3 tomatoes. 3 tomorrows. 3 tomorrows. The gentleman from Louisiana suggested I should focus on my own state before commenting on others. Crockett began, her tone measured. "I agree. We should all be informed about the states we discuss. So, let's examine the facts about Louisiana that the gentleman himself represents." Crockett opened her folder and removed the first document. According to the U.S. Department of Education's most recent assessment, Louisiana ranks 49th in educational performance nationwide. Only New Mexico ranks lower. The room grew still. This wasn't the partisan retort they had expected. Higgins sat up straighter, his attention suddenly focused on Crockett. "In math proficiency," she continued, "just 19% of Louisiana fourth graders scored at or above proficient levels, the lowest rate in the nation. In reading, it's 21%, second lowest nationally." She looked directly at Higgins. "These aren't my opinions, Congressman. These are statistics from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the gold standard of educational assessment." Higgins leaned forward to whisper something to a colleague, but Crockett pressed on. "Louisiana has the second highest poverty rate in the nation at 19.6%. Among children, it's 27.9%. More than 1 in 4 Louisiana children living in poverty." She displayed a graph showing Louisiana near the bottom of state rankings across multiple metrics. The state ranks 47th in healthcare access, 48th in public health, and has the 4th highest maternal mortality rate in the country. The gallery stirred. This wasn't typical congressional theater. Crockett was methodically presenting verified data that directly challenged Higgins' implied claim about Louisiana's superior governance. "Now," Crockett said, shifting to her next document, "I want to focus specifically on the gentleman's own district, Louisiana's 3rd congressional district." Higgins' expression darkened. This was getting personal in a way he hadn't anticipated. "In the gentleman's district," Crockett continued, "the child poverty rate is 28.7%, nearly 10 points higher than the national average. High school graduation rates are 8% below the national average, and median household income is $14,000 below the national median." Crockett paused, letting the statistics sink in. "I'm not sharing these figures to disparage Louisiana or its people. I'm sharing them because they illustrate precisely why federal education funding and oversight are so critical." Higgins interrupted, his voice sharp. "Point of order, Mr. Chairman. The gentlewoman is not addressing the bill before us." Chairman Comer hesitated before responding. "The chair will allow the gentlewoman to continue, as the gentleman from Louisiana opened this line of discussion with his earlier comments." Crockett nodded. "Thank you. Mr. Chairman?" She turned back to Higgins. "When states struggle with education and poverty, it's not because their people are less worthy or hardworking. Often, it's because state policies have failed them. In Louisiana's case, the state legislature cut education funding by 11% between 2008 and 2018, one of the steepest reductions in the country. She displayed another document. These cuts corresponded directly with declining test scores and increasing achievement gaps between wealthy and poor districts. The dynamic in the hearing room was shifting palpably. Democratic members were sitting forward, engaged by Crockett's fact-based approach. Even some Republican members appeared uncomfortable with how this was unfolding. Higgins tried another interruption. "Mr. Chairman, these cherry-picked statistics don't tell the whole story about my state." Crockett responded before the chairman could intervene. "If the gentleman feels these statistics from federal agencies, research universities, and nonprofit research organizations are cherry-picked, I welcome him to provide alternative data. I'm simply presenting the officially recognized figures." She turned to her final point in this section. "Now, let's address federal funding, which is the subject of today's hearing. Louisiana receives $1.78 from the federal government for every dollar its residents pay in federal taxes, one of the highest federal dependency ratios in the nation." Crockett let that sink in for a moment. The gentleman's district specifically receives over $1,200,000,000 annually in federal funding for education, healthcare, infrastructure, and disaster relief. She looked directly at Higgins. "That's not a criticism. That's federalism working as intended. The federal government supporting states with genuine needs. But it does raise a question. Why would a representative whose district so heavily depends on and benefits from federal support oppose strengthening the very programs that help his constituents?" The room fell silent again. Crockett had transformed what began as a personal attack into a substantive policy discussion backed by irrefutable data. Higgins shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly unprepared for this level of specific information about his own district. Chairman Comer glanced at the clock. "The gentlewoman has 1 minute remaining." Crockett nodded and gathered her papers. To conclude, "Mr. Chairman, I believe we can disagree on policy without personal attacks, but when such attacks occur, they should at least be based in factual reality." She looked around the committee room. The challenges facing states like Louisiana, and yes, parts of my state of Texas as well, are precisely why I support strengthened federal education funding with appropriate oversight. Not to control states, but to ensure every American child has access to quality education regardless of their zip code. Crockett turned back to Higgins, rather than dismissing colleagues who highlight these issues. "I'd hope the gentleman would join me in seeking solutions. After all, the children in his district deserve no less opportunity than children anywhere else in America." As her time expired, the hearing room remained unusually quiet. What had begun as another partisan skirmish had been transformed into something rarely seen in contemporary congressional hearings: a substantive, fact-based examination of policy impacts on real Americans. But the most powerful moment was yet to come. Act 4. The Triumph on Exposure. 108 minutes. As Crockett concluded her initial response, Chairman Comer recognized Congressman Higgins for his rebuttal. The Louisiana representative leaned into his microphone, his expression a mixture of frustration and barely contained anger. "The gentle lady has shared a lot of numbers that paint a distorted picture of my state." Higgins began, his voice gruff. "Louisiana has challenges like any state, but we are addressing them through conservative principles of local control and personal responsibility, not federal overreach." He shuffled through his papers, appearing to search for specific counterpoints. "These federal statistics are often politically motivated and do not capture the progress we are making. Our education system is improving, our economy is growing, and we are doing it the Louisiana way. Without specific data to counter Crockett's statistics, Higgins pivoted to broader ideological arguments. The Constitution leaves education to the states, not Washington bureaucrats. The gentle lady from Texas seems to believe the federal government knows better than Louisiana parents and teachers. Crockett raised her hand. Will the gentleman yield for a question? Higgins hesitated before responding. I will yield for a brief question. Thank you, Crockett said. Can the gentleman identify which specific statistics I cited that he believes are inaccurate and provide the corrected figures? The camera zoomed in on Higgins' face as he realized the trap. Without preparation, he could not dispute her specific claims. I am not going to get into a numbers game with the gentle lady. The broader point remains that reclaiming my time— Crockett interrupted following congressional procedure. Mr. Chairman, I believe I am entitled to a direct answer when the gentleman suggests I have presented distorted information. Chairman Comer nodded reluctantly. The gentleman from Louisiana should address the specific question. Higgins's face flushed darker. I do not have the exact alternative figures in front of me, but I know that Louisiana has made significant progress in recent years. The committee room stirred. It was a remarkable admission. A congressman effectively acknowledging he could not dispute specific facts about his own state and district. Crockett pressed her advantage. Thank you for that clarification, Congressman. I want to be absolutely clear that every statistic I cited comes directly from federal agencies, including those currently led by Trump-appointed officials or from nonpartisan research institutions. I would be happy to provide the committee with my complete sources. She held up her folder. In fact, Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to enter these statistics and their sources into the official record, without objection. So ordered. Chairman Comer responded, is attempted to regain control of the narrative. The gentle lady is missing the forest for the trees. This is not about specific numbers. It is about who should control education. Washington bureaucrats or local communities. Crockett seized on this opening. With respect, Congressman, it is precisely about the numbers. Policy should be based on measurable outcomes, not just ideological preferences. When children in your district are suffering from some of the highest poverty and lowest educational achievement rates in the nation, that is not a philosophical debate. It is a crisis requiring concrete solutions, she continued. And regarding local control, nothing in this legislation prevents local input. It simply establishes baseline standards and provides resources to meet them. Louisiana already accepts federal standards in exchange for highway funding, disaster relief, and healthcare dollars. Why should education be different? The dynamic had shifted dramatically. Higgins, usually dominating exchanges with his booming voice and forceful personality, appeared increasingly defensive. Without specific data to counter Crockett's points, his responses sounded increasingly like generic talking points. Then came the moment that would soon go viral across the nation. Congressman Higgins, Crockett said, her tone remaining professional but firm. You began this exchange by suggesting I should focus on problems in my state before addressing yours. I have shown I am well informed about both our states. Are you equally informed about the educational outcomes in my district in Texas compared to yours? The gallery tensed. This was a direct challenge to Higgins' preparation and knowledge. Higgins hesitated. I am not here to compare districts. I am here to defend Louisiana's right to control its own education system. Crockett nodded. I understand. But for the record, the high school graduation rate in my district is 89%, compared to 76% in yours. College attainment is 31% versus 19%, and the child poverty rate is 24% in my district, compared to nearly 29% in yours. She paused before delivering her most powerful point. I have done this homework not to score political points, but because I believe we have a responsibility to understand the actual conditions our constituents face in our own districts and nationwide. These are not just statistics. They're children's lives and futures. The committee room fell completely silent. Even members who had been checking their phones were now fully engaged. Mr. Chairman Crockett continued, I would like to share one final set of figures. Federal education funding to Louisiana increased by 23% over the past decade, while state funding decreased by 11%. Meanwhile, the gentleman from Louisiana voted against every federal education funding increase during his time in Congress. She looked directly at Higgins. The question is not whether the federal government should support education in Louisiana. It already does substantially. The question is whether that support should come with standards to ensure it actually improves children's lives. Higgins appeared momentarily speechless. The camera caught him glancing at his staff, who looked equally unprepared for this level of specific challenge. When he finally responded, his tone had changed noticeably. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the gentle lady's passion for education. While we may disagree on approaches, I think we can agree that improving outcomes for all children should be our goal. It was an unmistakable retreat from his earlier aggressive stance, a tacit acknowledgement that he could not effectively counter Crockett's command of the relevant facts. Chairman Comer, sensing the unusual dynamics of this exchange, intervened. The committee will take a 10-minute recess before continuing with questions from other members. As members left their seats, cameras captured something remarkable. Several Republican committee members approaching Crockett, examining her statistics, and engaging in what appeared to be substantive conversations. Meanwhile, Higgins huddled with his staff, frantically reviewing documents. The first half of the hearing had concluded, but the impact of Crockett's methodical dismantling of Higgins' position was only beginning to reverberate through the committee room and beyond. What had started as a personal attack had transformed into a masterclass in preparation and evidence-based argumentation. When the committee reconvened, the most extraordinary moment was yet to come. Act 5. Aftermath and Implications. 1825 plus minutes. When the hearing resumed after recess, a subtle but significant shift had occurred in the committee room. Several Republican members who had previously been aligned with Higgins' position now appeared more measured in their comments. The conversation had shifted from ideological abstractions about federal overreach to specific questions about how education funding could best improve outcomes. Near the end of the session, Chairman Comer recognized Higgins for a final comment. The Louisiana congressman appeared to have regrouped during the break, but his demeanor had noticeably changed. Mr. Chairman, Higgins began, his voice more subdued than earlier. I want to clarify some of my previous comments. While I maintain that education is best managed primarily at the state and local level, I acknowledge the important role of federal support, particularly in states facing economic challenges. He glanced briefly at Crockett before continuing. I also want to address my earlier remarks directed at the gentle lady from Texas. Upon reflection, they were inappropriately personal and failed to advance our policy discussion. I withdraw those remarks. The committee room stirred at this unexpected concession. Congressional apologies, even partial ones, were rare, especially in today's polarized environment. Higgins wasn't finished. I remain committed to improving outcomes for Louisiana's children, and I'm open to evidence-based approaches that respect our state's unique needs and challenges. As the hearing concluded, reporters rushed from the room to file their stories. What had begun as a routine committee session had produced a moment of genuine political consequence, a confrontation that had transformed into something approaching actual deliberation. Within hours, clips of the exchange began spreading across social media and news platforms. Louisiana stats and Crockett's were trending nationwide. Political commentators across the spectrum analyzed what had happened. On CNN, a political analyst observed, "What made this exchange remarkable wasn't just Congresswoman Crockett's command of the facts, but how she used them. She didn't weaponize Louisiana's challenges for a partisan attack. She connected them directly to the policy question at hand, whether federal education support with accountability measures benefits states with struggling systems." On MSNBC, another commentator noted, "We rarely see this level of specific district-level knowledge in congressional debates." Crockett basically conducted a mini-seminar on educational outcomes and federal support that left Higgins with no effective response. Even on Fox News, the coverage acknowledged the unusual nature of the exchange. Congressman Higgins was caught unprepared for the level of specific data Representative Crockett brought to this debate, admitted one conservative commentator. It's a reminder that effective congressional advocacy requires more than just ideological positioning. By evening, the story had expanded beyond political media to mainstream news outlets. The Washington Post headline read, "Freshman Democrats, Statistical Takedown, Changes Tone of Education Funding Debate." The New York Times followed with, "In rare congressional moment, data trumps dogma as Crockett counters Higgins." Louisiana local media found themselves in an awkward position, having to report on their congressman's difficult day, while also addressing the troubling statistics about their state that had been thrust into the national spotlight. Higgins-Crockett exchange puts Louisiana education challenges in national focus. Read the headline in The Advocate, "Louisiana's largest newspaper." The political impact spread beyond media coverage. Education advocacy groups seized on the moment, creating infographics comparing educational outcomes and funding levels across states. The statistics Crockett had cited were verified by fact-checkers and amplified across educational policy circles. 3 days after the hearing, Higgins appeared on a local Louisiana radio show to address what had happened. "I stand by my belief in local control," he insisted, "but I recognize that we need to be having more substantive fact-based discussions about how to improve outcomes for our children." When the host asked directly about being unprepared for Crockett's statistical counterpunch, Higgins admitted she came extremely well prepared with specific information about my district that, frankly, I should have had at my fingertips as well. It was a learning moment for me. This candid acknowledgement only amplified the story, leading to a fresh round of national coverage about a rare moment of congressional accountability. For Crockett, the aftermath brought new prominence and influence. She was invited to appear on Sunday morning political shows to discuss education policy. Democratic leadership began featuring her more prominently in press conferences on education and poverty initiatives. Even some Republicans privately acknowledged her effectiveness. What Representative Crockett demonstrated wasn't just good politics. It was good governance. Said a senior Democratic strategist, she showed that detailed knowledge of policy impacts can change the conversation more effectively than the performative confrontation we've become accustomed to. Education policy experts particularly noted how the exchange had temporarily broken through partisan framing. For a brief moment, we actually discussed the evidence on what works in education, said a professor from Teachers College at Columbia University. Crockett's approach forced a conversation about outcomes rather than just ideology. 2 weeks after the hearing, the House Education Committee announced a bipartisan field hearing in Louisiana to examine educational challenges and potential federal-state partnerships to address them. Both Higgins and Crockett were invited to participate. Meanwhile, in Louisiana itself, the exchange had sparked uncomfortable but necessary conversations. The editorial board of the Times-Picayune wrote, "Whatever one thinks of the political theater in Washington, the statistics Congresswoman Crockett cited about our state's educational outcomes are unfortunately accurate. Rather than dismissing this moment, Louisiana leaders should use it as motivation to address these persistent challenges. Several state legislators in Louisiana announced new education initiatives, acknowledging that the national spotlight had created pressure for action. Sometimes it takes someone from outside pointing to a problem to make us look at it with fresh eyes, admitted a Republican state senator. For everyday Louisianans, the reaction was mixed but thoughtful. "It's uncomfortable hearing these statistics about your state," said a teacher from Lake Charles interviewed on local news, but she wasn't wrong about the numbers. And maybe this will finally get us to address these issues more seriously. The most lasting impact, however, was on the relationship between statistical evidence and political debate. Political scientists noted that Crockett had provided a template for how factual preparation could effectively counter political bluster. What we witnessed was a case study in the power of coming to a political fight armed with irrefutable data rather than just matching rhetoric with rhetoric, wrote a professor of political science in an analysis for The Atlantic. Crockett didn't just win the exchange. She actually changed minds by connecting abstract policy debates to concrete realities. 6 months later, when the House voted on the education funding bill that had been the subject of that fateful hearing, something remarkable happened. The legislation passed with modest bipartisan support, including notably the vote of Congressman Clay Higgins. When asked by reporters about his vote, which contradicted his earlier position, Higgins gave a response that reflected how much had changed since his confrontation with Crockett. "I still believe in local control," he explained. "But this revised legislation includes the accountability and flexibility measures that make sense for states like Louisiana. My constituents need these resources, and this bill provides them in a responsible way," he added with a hint of hard-earned wisdom. Sometimes it takes a colleague challenging your thinking to help you see an issue more clearly. For Jasmine Crockett, the episode crystallized her philosophy of public service. In a profile back home, she put it plainly, "I came to Congress with the same mindset I brought to the courtroom. Preparation matters. Facts matter. The people we represent deserve leaders who understand the conditions they face, not just talking points that play well on cable news." She stressed that her exchange with Congressman Higgins was never about humiliating a colleague. It was about anchoring the debate in reality, because children's futures hinge on getting policy right. In the aftermath, the Crockett-Higgins showdown migrated from cable segments to classrooms, taught as a case study in political science programs across the country. It offered a rare counterpoint to today's polarized theater. Proof that subject matter mastery and disciplined preparation can still bend a conversation toward substance. One commentator summed it up. "In an era when political clashes generate more heat than light, this moment showed how the most effective communication fuses passion with precision, advocacy with accuracy, and a fighting spirit with factual grounding." Share your thoughts below. We're listening and want to hear what resonates with our audience. And if this story spoke to you, please like, share, subscribe to the channel, and tap the notification bell to hear more. Before you go, check out the featured video on your screen, one of the stories we're most proud of. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you next time.